Husker fans, we are just about 10 days away from seeing what this 2024 edition could look like this fall. And there's still some important work to be done. We're talking Nebraska football with all of you right here at the Voice of College Football. So lock it in for the next 60 with Justin and myself, and we'll talk Huskers. Leave those comments and questions. Consider the super chat as well. Justin Adams, of course, the Big Ten show, Cheesy Corn Sports, and of course, holding things out down here at the Voice of College Football, GBR. Justin, what's going on tonight?
Not a whole lot. Just to explain to some what's been going on with the content delay. I put it on the community tab, and the reason for postponing the episode. As you can hear, my voice is still in recovery mode a little bit. So I talked to Mark about this about a week and a half ago. I sneezed, caused some pain in my Adam's apple, and then all of a sudden, each day the pain started working its way down when I swallow, every time I swallow. And then when it got to like here, my voice just went out. And so it's been dealing with that, trying to come back for a few days. I sounded like Bane for a few of them. I sounded like I was whispering constantly through a few of them, but it's back enough to where I felt like I could push through a show and get some content out. So apologies for that. We are back though.
Justin, we'll take you any way we can get you, but we would prefer you without the Bane delivery. That would be a little too menacing. I know the Huskers want to be that menacing on the field, but that might be a little too scary for everyone here to listen to that every week. But I am no doctor, but I'm thinking it sounds like some infection that you had in just kind of made its way to the throat when you.
Yeah, it felt like I pulled the muscle in there. But yeah, like I said, every time I looked up, like muscles pulled in that area, it basically said that I was going to die from a laryngeal fracture and my airways were going to close, but it didn't, or yet it hasn't yet. So, and we're recovering, so we feel all right. Still no idea what it is. I don't have health insurance right now, so we're just going to ride it out and hope for the best.
Well, anyone who may be thinking that Mark's a taskmaster, that this was Justin saying, "Let's give it a go tonight." I wanted to go on Friday. I said, Justin, or not even at all this week, just to say you give it as much time as possible. So, but Justin can't wait to get the content out there.
Got a lot to talk about.
Yes. So we're going to start with Matt Rhule's latest in front of the media, and in particular addressing the wide receivers.
Yeah. So there was, Garrett McGuire came out there. Matt Rhule came out there. They had Isaiah Nair out there. And, they're just in talking about in general the wide receiver room, because, again, that is one of the biggest question marks coming into this season, just because the inexperience last year, the injuries last year, true freshmen flashing potential, just not consistency. So, it's one of the position groups that has the potential to be elite and one of the best on this team, but it also has the potential to, as we've seen, be a liability. However, with the pieces in place, we feel like this is the wide receiver room. With Jamal Banks and Isaiah Nair also talked. So, but when in talking about, just how the wide receivers are coming through in camp, Matt Rhule was talking about ball skills not quite being there. Overall, he seems happy with what he sees. But the thing in there, our overlays came up. Let me remove that overlay there with our names on it and show our display names. Sorry about that. But when he's talking about, getting press coverage and stuff like that and beating press, and talking about how the physicality, we don't necessarily have the ability to beat off press coverage, or with the way the defense is played, because we don't run a lot of press coverage, right? So, but essentially with press coverage, like something like that is very fundamentally driven and it's something you can work on in terms of the wide receiver fundamentals, because to beat press coverage, really it's about attacking three things. You want to attack the leverage, attack the hands, and attack the feet. You also kind of want to attack the hips, but essentially what you want to do is off the line, just be aggressive, attack the hands, attack their leverage, kind of get them off balance, and try to get their hips rotated to the outside. And you want to beat them with your feet. You want to get them off balance, but you got to maintain your balance, because typically if you beat somebody off a press, they're going to grab you. They're going to try to get physical, do something to take you out of the play, because at that point they're beat. So those are things that can be taught, not chopping your feet too much at the line, using each step efficiently, making a drop step and negative step into your route. So it's one of those things that can be worked on if they drill it and they rep it. So he said they're trying to work that in more. And that's one of the bigger things. The ball skills, I think, will come, when you got aggressive receivers like Banks and Nair, the ball skills will be there. And Nair said one of his strengths was 50-50 balls. So being able to go up and get balls, we know Jamal Banks, one of his biggest strengths is using his body and using his leverage and getting up and attacking the ball at the high point and using his physicality. So that seems to be a point of emphasis this time around, which is good, because last year it seemed, the aggressiveness in attacking the ball wasn't there. And that also leads to a lot of interceptions and stuff like that. So I like that he's coming out and giving us an idea of not only where they're strong, but where they're weak and need some work and need to be, better with their fundamentals. And I think with the mindset that he's putting into him, Isaiah Nair said something that stood out, relying on technique, not talent, and trusting your training. And something I'd mentioned before, where you want to play the game of football off instinct. You don't want to be thinking. It's not a thinking man's game. If you're out there thinking, you're not reacting in time. You're going to be a half step late. And it seems like that's what he's trying to instill in them, is to just focus on your technique, do what we drilled. The reason we drilled it is to make it muscle memory and to drill it into your mind. But the press coverage, that type of stuff doesn't seem like it was an emphasis back then. So that's why they're working on it now. And it also seems like the wide receiver room also, overall, like Isaiah Nair talked about how he's, really open to learning from the younger guys and these freshmen, because Isaiah Nair is fast as it gets. He is twitchy himself, but he's a big body. He's a longer guy who can stretch the field. And so when talking about and when asked about these younger, smaller, twitchier guys, he even talked about how much he can learn from them and growing his skill set in regards to being a little bit more of a playmaker, because he already was a playmaker. I think what the biggest thing that kind of threw me off, though, this bothers me, and I won't go after Nebraska reporters too terribly much, but Isaiah Nair tore his ACL in August of 2022. Okay, so when you get up the podium, there's limited time to ask these guys questions, and one of the questions that came up there was asking about, where is he at in his recovery, or like, how is he feeling? How's the knee feeling? Is he 100%? and that, to me, that's just such a wasted question. And the problem here is he's 2 years removed from the ACL surgery. Matt Rhule's already alluded to the fact that he's holding guys out who have any kind of nagging injuries. And Isaiah Nair's whole thing in Texas wasn't the fact that he was still injured. It was fitting into a wide receiver room under Sarkisian that had talent, tons of talent, and trying to work his way back in when he was recruited from the previous staff. So questions like that, they really irk me. And I don't know why I wanted to point that out, but it really is frustrating, because we can learn a lot from these guys, And I think the last biggest thing I took away from him is when he's talking about what the difference is in where he's been versus here. And he talks about, it felt like home, meeting coaches and players, smooth transition, everybody's bought in, and culture, and hearing that is something that was so important to us, because we know the culture was so bad here. And Matt Rhule being a culture guy, we were wondering, can he come in and right the ship? And I don't think we expected it to happen this quick, where, you look at the portal and there's guys leaving schools, right? Colorado is up to like 11 players that have left. And Nebraska had a couple of people hit the portal. That's it. And so even being over on spots and even having these guys, some of these guys that are probably fixated in their positions. None of these guys are yet leaving because I think they see the value in the program, in their own development. And also I think Matt Rhule is legitimately giving everybody a chance to go out there and fight for a spot on the team. I don't think it's one of those things where he's showing favorites to the starters. I really think it's one of those things where he's going out there and he's giving everybody the equal opportunity to prove what they have. And that to me stands out because that again is something that we were so far away from in the past is judging these guys based on talent and, how they perform in practices.
So a couple things stand out. One would be that even though Scott Frost knows plenty of football, more than either one of us,
Mm.
there is an attention to detail issue that was pretty obvious with him.
Yeah.
And with coaches that don't achieve. You look at Nick Saban as being a standard, obviously, and that's something that he goes to anytime he's ever been asked about his success is attention to detail.
Right.
So you were going through the wide receiver approach and what is being taught and what is being drilled into them in regards to different attack points by press coverage and what they need to be looking out for.
Yep.
And all of those things, and not just allowing them to kind of freelance or giving them basic instructions. So there's some attention to detail there that is obvious.
Yep.
Also, what comes to mind is you mentioned two players in the transfer portal, and we can get to them in a second, although they're probably somewhat inconsequential, not as people, of course, folks. We're talking about a football team. So, because, I went live the last 2 days and we'll be live Thursday and Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern time over on the national channel. We're reviewing all the happenings in the transfer portal.
Yeah.
And it's pretty clear, and I had heard this talked about in a few different circles, that this transfer cycle, especially this one, it being in the spring, the same thing occurred last year to an extent, but even more so this year, there were reasons to believe because of where scholarship numbers stand for most programs that need to cut.
Yep.
Most programs, most of the conversations I have with guys like you on the various shows that we have and others when we do records with everyone is that the scholarship numbers for most teams are over the limit and they're trying to cut back. Therefore, it's reflected in the transfer portal that I would say out of the 50 or 60, 70 players that I've gone through on these two shows, that it's pretty clear that about 5, 6, 7 of them where the player obviously is a good enough player that he made that decision to leave.
Yes.
The other 80 some percent seem to be guys that are probably getting the nudge out the door. And that's where we stand in this transfer portal cycle, because again, 5, 6, 7 of these guys have been pretty premier players, all conference kind of players where, okay, the latest being this TCU defensive tackle. He was a freshman All-American 2 years ago. Dominic Williams last year, all Big 12. He's making a decision. He's not getting pushed out the door. The two players for Nebraska, I remember seeing Chris Collier, and I can't recall who else has hit the transfer portal.
And Chris Collier was a guy who transferred in from Florida and then left them, committed to Nebraska, played in 5 games, just defense, special teams, but no tackles, no really anything. So yes, and no shot at him, inconsequential player in terms of production. Yeah. And so I just, sometimes with these players, they're not a good fit, so Collier may have just been not a good fit for the team. He's very talented though. Was a 4-star kid out of high school, but I think he was the higher rated of the losses, but neither one were really big deal. And this is expected to happen just because, like you said, we're over on numbers, and some of these guys are going to start, even though they're giving everybody a chance, I think some of these guys are going to start seeing, they're not blind out there. They're seeing what's going on. They're seeing the talent, and they're seeing the system. And, that's another thing. Got to remember, Corey Collier, maybe this isn't a good system. Maybe the 3-3-5 isn't a good system for him. So So family issues. Yeah. So, there's a myriad of things that can go into this, but that is one of the things that's going to happen. We're going to see. And as long as it's these guys who really haven't produced and aren't expected to produce necessarily, um, those are the guys that I don't want to say need to go, but to clear room on the depth chart, those are the guys that have to go. And as long as it's not any talent, we're okay. We're doing the right things. But wish them both the best, wherever they end up. So
Talking Huskers with all of you. We do this typically on Tuesday night. Lock it in, 7 Eastern, 6 Central. Be here next Tuesday. Bring a friend or two or 50 with you, and we'll talk Huskers as we prepare at this time next week on Tuesday for the spring game at Memorial Stadium.
yep.
Before
Just a
we
quick
move on to some other topics, anything else you wanted to hit on with the spring
Well,
sessions?
one thing first before I carry on, I forgot to touch on this at the beginning of the show, but Greg Sharpe, I don't know if y'all are, prayers or religious people out there. Greg Sharpe of the Voice of Nebraska, kind of alluded to on his show about his diagnosis, his show Sports Nightly, of course, about his diagnosis of cancer. I don't think he went into the specifics about it, but it's on the Huskers radio network, and he kind of went over that, and that was moving around Twitter a little bit. So, he's in our thoughts and prayers. And if y'all pray out there, just go ahead and give him, a little bit of a thought there. So, and wish him recovery.
I'm glad you brought that up, because otherwise I would not have seen that, except for I belong to 4 or 5 Nebraska Facebook groups, and I was posting just a notice about this week's show, and saw that on one of the Nebraska Facebook groups. And Greg was kind enough to join us probably about a year ago to record a segment here, and he seems like a remarkable guy. He's obviously a huge talent in the field, and was very giving of his time, and we had a great conversation with him. So
Yeah,
we certainly hope for all the best. And again, as Justin has said, depending on your belief system, send up a prayer, a thought for Greg um,
absolutely.
throughout the next few weeks.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Yep. And nobody has a really bad thing to say about him out there. He's been doing what he's been doing a long time, very good at it, and he does things the right way. So but yeah, outside of that, there was a couple of recruiting, just little recruiting nuggets. Chase Lofton, we've talked about him in the past, the tight end, 4-star. He's cutting down his list of contenders, and he has Nebraska, I believe, in his top 4 for that. Of course, he's out of Millard South in Nebraska. So Nebraska, one of those guys that Nebraska really, really wants to hammer down and land. So a top 24/7 offensive lineman, the pronunciation, Alai Kalanivalu. Okay. Listen, with the Hawaiian names, I don't like to pronounce names wrong or disrespect people. So, but 6 official visits on his itinerary. Nebraska is one of those as well. So, a couple of things there. And Nebraska's battling for a top 100 linebacker, Dawson Merritt. So, yeah, a lot of news coming out in the recruiting front. So, yeah, interesting to see how all of that plays out, because, it is the point where we're going to start seeing some of the 2025 class, early people make some of these decisions. So hopefully Chase Lofton is one of those guys that we can hammer down early in the process. So
Justin brought up a topic to me before we went live that is a fascinating topic concerning the approach of Matt Rhule and Deion Sanders. And of course, these 2 coaches met on the field, and their 2 teams will meet on the field again this fall. And while last year's result was pretty inconsequential because both teams fell far short of bowl play and so forth, it is a look into where we stand with college football coaches. And of course, Deion bringing a very different approach. And I think Justin and I will have much to say about some of the facts and figures that we're going to bring to light based on the USA Today article. And again, I thank Justin for bringing this to the table here. So since Matt Rhule took the job in Lincoln in November 2022, he has visited 108 high schools, and he has made 486 off-campus contacts with potential recruits, including 123 this past December and January, according to records obtained by USA Today Sports. And so that is Matt Rhule's approach to building a program. He's a grinder. He is going to get out there. He is going to meet the players on their turf. He is going to be a go-getter. By contrast, before I read off these numbers, we've got Deion Sanders, of course, at Colorado, taking the job right about the same time. Can anybody guess in the chat? In the chat, please guess how many.
Without looking at the article.
Yes. Guess how many off-campus recruiting trips compared to 108. Visited 108 high schools and 486 off-campus contacts.
Yep.
Compare that to Deion Sanders. So give a guess on how many off-campus visits and recruiting trips Deion Sanders has made in that same time span. Does anybody have a guess?
We got
Versus
8.
108 high schools and 486 recruiting contacts.
We have 859 so far, 26.
Yeah, so you guys are right on with the thought process here that it doesn't even compare, right? That Deion Sanders is barely getting out there, and while Matt Rhule is all over the place, really going after these recruits. So the numbers you have thrown out there, I would consider to be really good guesses because you're on the money in terms of the thought process. But you know what the number is? 0.
Yep.
Deion Sanders has not left campus to visit any high school football recruits.
Yep. And we'll get into some of the quotes and the difference of philosophies in a second that they had on there. But yeah, 0.
It's amazing.
0. And, they asked the question, is off-campus recruiting as necessary today as before with the portal? And the question there, yes, that is a fair question to raise, right? But just because the importance of something is lessened doesn't mean you just throw it in the trash can altogether. And, so they're just at two different extremes, right? Matt Rhule is very much foundational and still believes in his way. And that's what's made him successful. So there's no reason for him to venture outside of that. He's very much about culture, family, building. And the way you build is you get high schoolers that you can have and develop over time. Again, he's not one of the guys who likes a one-year starter. And so with that, Matt Rhule's found a way to integrate, though, a little bit of both, the high school into the portal, where he uses the portal to attack instant needs, depth, stuff like that we'll need for the following season, but then still recruits heavily for the future. And so in that way, he feels you can build a foundation, and the foundation will help the guys from outside integrate as opposed to trying to bring it all together at one time and in one off season. And so, because we even hear him talk about the transition from last year going from more accountability on the coaches to this year, more accountability on the players. Well, that's something that can only come over year. That can't come with 1 year, rentals. And looking at the two classes, they broke them down in there. They're ranked number 22 and 23 respectively. But with Rhule, 32 high school recruits to 6 transfer recruits. Deion, 25 transfer recruits to 10 high school recruits. And, lost Cormani McClain yesterday, who was the coveted prize, the 5-star cornerback to pair with the other 5-star cornerback, Travis Hunter. And so Cormani McClain is leaving. And so they're losing a lot of guys as well. And, what Rhule said was important to him, make sure he shows people respect of coming to their homes and seeing the people that matter to them and then bringing them on campus to sell them on the family atmosphere. And what Deion was kind of alluding to was, and it's very much the me philosophy that he has. And he says, I very much believe like that parents don't want me at their house. Sanders said on March 20th, they said, yeah, March 20th. So they come to see me in my house. They want to come see me, my house. They want to see how I live, how I get down. They want to see what I've got going on, what God has done in my life. And, you know, it's just a very selfish way to go about it, because how do you know what they want? You know, how do you know what their family wants? You just assume their family doesn't want you in their house. I mean, you're Deion Sanders. Like, I'm sure they would welcome you over, you know, and be excited to do so. And then, but the Rhule's philosophy on it, when he's talking about them coming to his house, is he said, I want them to meet my wife and family. And again, that just further drives home the point about culture. And you know, the way somebody says something is very, very telling. And, you know, Matt Rhule didn't even say he wants them to come meet him, see his home. They want him to meet his family because they are part of his family, as he's mentioned before. He said in his press conference, he said, players that play for me forever. And that just adds to the family vibe. But it also shows in the fact that one school's lost 2 people, one school's lost 11, including impact players, you know. And another thing that I saw on Twitter, and this, I'm not sure who else saw this. He posted, he posted on Instagram a story, and it said offensive recruits DM Shiloh Sanders, his son. Defensive recruits DM Shiloh, and offensive recruits DM Shadur. So his sons, I guess, are headlining, springboarding the recruiting, which then automatically puts them on a pedestal above everybody else all of a sudden. And I don't understand how anybody expects something to be built there. And so this article just alludes to the difference in philosophies and stuff like that. They said Harbaugh, I don't know if you saw the numbers where it said Harbaugh, 145 off-campus visits, Brian Kelly, 257, Sarkisian, 128, Chip Kelly, 55. Or UCLA, we saw that went. They talk about Saban was known for his appearances on campus.
And just to interrupt real quick,
Go
that's why
ahead.
Chip Kelly's doing what he's doing right now. That's
Yes.
why he's the offensive coordinator at Ohio State.
Recruiting.
He never liked recruiting, number one. And number two, now it's needed even more with the transfer portal, and he wants nothing to do with that. He wants to coach football. So
Yeah.
that's his decision. Yep.
And I almost argue that high school recruiting is important more so in certain ways, because with the transfer portal being as growing as much as it is, having these guys just being able to leave on a whim, like, you're not always going to be able to just immediately replace them with transfer guys. So even more so, you want to have these guys that are in place that know the system, that know the philosophies, that know the culture, that know their teammates, to be able to step in that, even if they may not be as talented as the guy ahead of them. All of those things are more likely to close that gap than if you have a guy who's less talented and has to learn all that on the fly all of a sudden. So, you know, it's one of those things where it's like high school recruiting is very much still important, but it's important in its own ways. And what Rhule likes to do is just bring in the transfers that he knows are going to make an instant impact, guys that he knows fit his, you know, philosophy. And another thing too is, you know, Deion likes high school recruits that are, you know, elite out of high school. And Matt Rhule likes guys that are elite athletes, but raw in terms of technique and fundamentals, because again, he believes there's a ceiling for athleticism, but there's not a ceiling for skills. And that's what he likes to build upon. Where I think Deion just really likes to build his brand and have big name players and players that he thinks can come in and be successful immediately. And if they're not, see ya, there's a door. So that right there was my overarching point of that. What's your take on that?
So if this were 10 years ago and this was not Deion Sanders involved, I would be completely on Rhule's end of the spectrum, completely, because there's just no way high school recruiting was the complete lifeblood of any program, and it still is and needs to be to a large degree
Yep.
for a couple different reasons. You're still most likely, even with all the transfers that we are seeing, if you look at the best teams in the nation, they still are built by, and the majority of the roster, especially the better players on the roster, are still the guys that they recruited and signed out of high school.
Correct.
So that's one point. The next one would be if this situation with NIL, and regardless of who grabs control of the landscape of college football, whether that's the NCAA or, as most people believe, it's going to be some kind of partnership between the SEC and the Big Ten or whomever else is involved, they're going to get a hold of what we're seeing right now and build some type of structure. There's still going to be player movement, but it's going to be more controlled. The one thing that I noticed in going through all these transfers over the last 2 days, we are seeing more and more players who never played for this particular team. They transferred at the end of last season in December. They never played for the team.
Yep.
And now they're transferring again. And I think they're going to clean that up. I think that there's at least going to be a 1-year commitment once there is some type of salary structure in place.
Right.
So just going out there and raiding the transfer portal, I really don't think that that's going to be sustainable. Plus, football is the ultimate team game.
Yeah.
And when you're in the fourth quarter in Iowa City, or pick your spot, Camp Randall Stadium, and it's a tough game, and it basically comes down to, in 25-degree weather, these teams are evenly matched. Who wants it more? Who wants it for the guy next to them more? Again, it's an effort sport.
Mm-hmm.
It's a talent sport. Of course, you've got to have talent. So that's a given. But
Yep.
let's get by the talent. It's an effort sport, and the separation is going to come from the teams that are poised, that are disciplined, but they're also disciplined and poised because they care about what they're doing and they care about the guy next to them.
Yep.
And there is some level of camaraderie.
Yeah.
And if the likes of Deion Sanders is throwing together a team every summer that is different, and different guys playing with each other that don't have that 2 and 3 and 4 years together, I don't think that's going to work. The one and so my caveat to being completely on Rhule's side was, number one, that there is a transfer portal that needs to be used, that has changed the acquisition of talent to a certain extent. So you do have free agent fixes that do work. You do
like
have
Ohio State. Like Ohio State's been doing this offseason, right? They
yeah.
made moves that they needed to make, except
Yeah.
at running back, they just doubled up. But
Yeah, if you look at Ohio State, you're basically looking at a team that, to my initial point, is still
built on recruits.
Yeah, the core of their team is still built on these great recruiting classes, but they added a star running back, they added a star safety, and they added their starting quarterback.
Yeah.
That's basically what they needed. And probably will get an offensive lineman or two.
Can I use an analogy real quick to
Sure.
your point, to double down on it? It almost like people are afraid to compare this to any other sport, but you look at baseball, for instance, right? And I know I'm from Houston. I'm an Astros fan. Okay. However, the Astros built that dynasty because they drafted the core of that team, right? But even then, they still added Justin Verlander in 2017 at the deadline. They still made the moves to get those veteran guys in there that they knew could come in and set them over the top. And that's essentially kind of what you're alluding to. But it's just the college game, and it's called recruiting, and it's not called free agency. It's called transfer portal. It's not called drafting. It's called recruiting, but it's the same concept.
Absolutely. And my last point, somewhat on Deion's side, is that he is a unique commodity. Like Matt Rhule can't take over at Nebraska and think he's going to do it like Deion Sanders, because he's not Deion Sanders. There's
Correct.
only one of him, and I hate to put him in his own category, but as a character, as a icon in the sport, and based on what he was able to accomplish as an all-time great cornerback on both levels, he's just different.
Right.
So he can get away with a lot of that. Now, what changes is if you look at a lot of iconic athletes who have become head coaches, if they didn't apply themselves, if Deion Sanders racks up 4-8, 6-6, 5-7, 4-8, then he no longer is Deion Sanders, the great all-time player. He is now just a kind of run-of-the-mill coach, and that's going to wear off if he doesn't back it up with winning.
Correct. He's too busy trying to be prime time and not coach prime, like he likes to be called, you know. And so when it comes to, to your point there, where it's like trying to give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, whenever the season was early on in the season, and I talked about their different philosophies back then, one of the things I did mention was that I don't think Deion would have been a successful coach at Nebraska, and I don't know how Matt Rhule would have done at Colorado. And the reason I say that is because it's not that I don't think Matt Rhule could build Colorado, but I think Colorado's the type of program that needed a shot in the arm. Like they can't recruit necessarily off of history, facilities, like campus location. Yes, beautiful campus, right? But Nebraska has a lot of built-in things that they can recruit off of, fan bases and those things. But when it comes to recruiting there, they weren't very good in terms of recruiting classes. So Deion was able to go there, add a lot of excitement, and get players that otherwise would not have been there. I just think there was a lot of collateral on the way he went about it. And I think that collateral is starting to kind of backfire. I talked about before, it didn't seem like he was building any kind of culture of discipline, accountability, or anything like that, and it even came out, a few weeks back whenever Deion got an email from the teachers talking about how the players are just kind of doing their own thing in class, and she recommends that they take online courses only, and that just further shows the lack of discipline and stuff in that program. And I think that's why you're starting to see some of the talent leave because, Cormani McClain, a lot of Colorado fans are saying he lacked discipline and all this other stuff. He was soft. But if Cormani McClain is going in there and not getting developed in the way he wants, and what if he wants to acquire that discipline? What if he wants somebody to guide him there? These are high school kids. We didn't all come out of high school with discipline. We didn't all come out of high school knowing everything. Some of these kids want guidance. And if they're not getting that, it's not something you can just throw away, because not all of these guys are going to make it in the NFL. So I think Prime's, deal is selling the fact that he's prime time. He could put him in the NFL, but not all of these kids are going to make it there. And you gotta set these kids up for real life as well. I don't think that's something that's happening. And when it comes to just building the team in general, if you look at an offensive line, and I said this before too, offensive lines can't be built in transfer portal. You can add pieces to an already established offensive line, but an offensive line more than any is a unit, right? They need camaraderie. And so that can be built over time. That can be built, looking at the guy to your right, looking at the guy to your left, and knowing you've been through battle with them. When you try to patchwork 5 guys into an offensive line and you have a spring to kind of bring it together, it's a lot more difficult, because they need to know their quarterback's tendencies. The quarterback needs to know what his offensive line's doing. He needs to know weak spots in line. He needs to know it's where everything starts. And so, yeah, that's my take on just the transfer portal in terms of building, because what was Colorado's biggest weakness last year? Offensive line, and probably going to be an issue this year as well.
I got to say that while Colorado's final record, I was not surprised with. Actually, I think I nailed it to a T, 4-8. It happened somewhat in the inverse way that I anticipated because that team was so thrown together. I thought, well, it's going to take them a little while to gel. But they've got some very interesting pieces.
Yeah.
It was fun watching them play for a lot of different reasons. But if you just get down to the football of it, uh, Travis Hunter was one of the most exceptional athletes to watch last year on both sides of the ball. But as a
He got
cornerback,
to do it.
I don't know how many times I saw him play off his coverage and play off his man and read something, break on the ball, and show the brain to be able to do that, but
Phenomenal.
also had the athleticism to get there to the spot and make
Great
a
player.
play. He's phenomenal.
Yeah, he's excellent.
Yeah, and so they had pieces on offense. They had a lot of speed and so forth. But it happened in inverse that I expected because they came out of the gate. They played well.
Yeah.
Now TCU obviously wasn't anything close to what were the year before, in Colorado State. That was an exciting game and everybody watched it, but that's not a big win. You're beating Colorado State
They
in
were ranked outside
overtime.
of the top 100.
Yeah, that was our indicator that okay, that was exciting, but it's gonna come crashing down here real soon. And the
Yeah.
game against Nebraska,
There was a lot that Nebraska did wrong.
the quarterback position is unlike any other in sports in regards to everybody else can be doing everything right, and if he just throws the ball away, then
Yes.
he has
Yeah,
sabotaged your drive.
exactly. Nebraska dominated the first half of that game. Colorado dominated the second half. Well, when Nebraska dominated the first half, they were still down 13-0 because Jeff Sims kept turning it over in their territory or anytime we were about to score. So yeah, that's the game. And then the score was 13-6 up until late in the third quarter. And Nebraska's playing at altitude. Their defense was on the field the whole game, and they're playing at altitude, so they got worn down. That's why the score was a little more lopsided. But yeah, like you said, TCU lost 90% of their offensive talent to the draft after the national championship game.
We're going to be kind to Fong Wei because he's here on a regular basis. He has to be kidding.
They're
This
ranked.
has to be an ultimate troll here. You were smarter than that, Fong Wei.
They were ranked outside of the top 100 when they beat Colorado. They're not a good team. But they played up because they hated Colorado. Everybody did.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a flash in the pan. I think Colorado's opening to the season was the best case scenario. They're playing the national championship team off of losing their quarterback, their running back, and their wide receiver to the draft. That was 90% of their offensive production. And then they come out and they're ranked because, of course, but the drop from where they were to where they started the season ranked should have told you how much talent because they were in 14th, something like that. You don't drop from the national championship game to 14th unless something's gone awry. They're not going to drop you out of the rankings, but they're starting to hint you should be there. And that was just one of those things where it was just kind of like they play, everybody was there. It was, lights were shining, all these guys were fresh. And they came out and they started the season hot. But, the thing is, this is where we're going to see the result of what we just talked about, because this coming season, now they've had a year to kind of implement their systems, implement their players, and kind of somewhat build a structure of what it's going to look like. And I will be out there to watch that game in Lincoln. So, but yeah, it's, he said, Deion even came out and said they target guys that are mostly in the portal. And he says, talks about making visits to guys in the portal, making visits to their homes instead. But, again, Matt Rhule said it moves so fast, and that's another thing too. Like these transfer portal guys, as it mentioned, is like they've already gone through the ringer of the high school recruits, like in-home visits and all that. And usually they're trying to transfer and make a decision quickly. They don't have time to sit there and go visit, and have all these coaches come visit and stuff like that. So that philosophy is completely backwards to me. And so you're out there trying to visit guys who have already, I think he's trying to skip the developmental part, try to get guys who already have been developed and focus on his brand. That's my take on it.
Alan, thank you for the contribution. We appreciate you being here and encouraging everyone to hit the like button. Please do that. Get it out of the way, folks. It helps the algorithm and tells YouTube that you do, in fact, like what we're doing here at the Voice of College Football. So please do that.
Yep.
All right.
Couple more. You want to put out the NCAA like the stuff that I can. So, for the people that didn't see on Twitter, the first thing that kind of went around was the schools now can pay NIL, meaning that it can come out of the actual school's budget. And Matt Rhule had said before that he wants to have as much of this come from the donors, boosters, fan, you know, led NIL and stuff like that than the school. This right here it opens up a big window, though, for a lot of scrutiny and a lot of people really coming after the athletics department because the allocation of resources is going to be a big, big point of contention and where the money goes and how much is going to the athletic department versus the academical side of things. And so they said council changes, transfer rules permit immediate eligibility for transfers who are academically standing at previous schools met progress towards a degree. So they do the immediate transfer rule. That one dropped. And then also the one where schools can pay NIL. And the one where schools can pay NIL kind of went under the radar because it dropped at the same exact time. And people were more worried about the portal stuff. Both are big. And they say for transparency, here's end quote from the article. The data, which will be de-identified and aggregated for trend reporting and some level of transparency, will include contact information for involved parties, service providers, terms of arrangement. Essentially, so they'll have compensation payment structure there that will be available for them, and applicable compensation between student athletes and service providers. Prospective student athletes will be required to disclose the same information pre-enrollment NIL activity within 30 days of enrollment to accept school assistance in NIL activities or become a student athlete. And so, basically we're inching our way into contracts. That's about where we are. That's where recruiting is officially going to turn into free agency. We're working our way towards contracts and clauses and all that. And the first step in that was having the schools be able to pay NIL and structure these things. So that's going to be very, very interesting to see play out over time. And I don't think that's getting enough attention, at least yet. It dropped like in 45 minutes before the show.
Yeah. So, what I think is going to be one of the main considerations that will possibly change the sport or the power structure of the sport is how this revenue and these salaries are going to be handled in this way. Is there going to be a revenue sharing plan by college football? So, is this new league, whether that's just the Big Ten and the SEC or whomever else they bring on, and that's 32, 48, whatever the number, we saw the number at 70 with 80 going to that number because of a group of 5 entries. Whether they're going to, and if that's the case, then they're going to have to share money because the value of probably out of those 80, the value of 40 of them isn't enough to compensate and justify the TV contracts.
Nope.
So regardless of what the number is, let's say that we finish with 48 teams. And those are all the teams that have been deemed worthy of adding to the TV contract that bring value, and everybody else go do whatever you want. Go play group of 5 football, and we'll schedule you 1 or 2 games in September.
Right.
But otherwise, we're doing our own thing because we're here to make money.
Right.
All right. Similar to what we talked about a few weeks ago with, we'll take, for example, the Big Ten contract.
Yep.
Where I think the revenue is something right around $1 billion a year.
Something like that.
NBC, CBS, and Fox.
Yep.
If the same amount of money or the same budget or cap is given to each particular team, depending on where that money comes from, is it fair that we'll use Ohio State as an example versus Indiana, that they're going to be using the same amount of money? even though Ohio State draws 10 times the viewership
Right.
and they bring in the money. We
Yep.
know who brings in the money.
Correct.
Ohio State and Michigan bring in the most money, and then it's Penn State, and then it's Nebraska and Wisconsin and so forth. If Nebraska ever starts winning to the level that Ohio State's winning, they'll probably be right up there as well.
Right.
So it's part of it's never going to change.
Correct.
Part of it will change somewhat depending on who's winning and USC, et cetera. We can all, come up with the tiers pretty easily.
Yep.
Or do they do something? You brought up Major League Baseball a few minutes ago. Well, Major League Baseball obviously has a huge issue and always has with
Salary
the
cap.
New York Yankees,
Dodgers.
just by the sheer luck of being located in New York City. Even if they do nothing right, just make tons of money through their Yes Network and the local radio rights and everything, just can be jacked up through the roof versus what Kansas City can draw, because there's just not enough people there
The
to
Dodgers,
justify.
just to show you, the Dodgers are paying 3 players $3 billion. 3 players combined $1 billion over the course of their contract.
Yeah.
3.
And so that's always been an issue. Well, Major League Baseball came up with a system in which they devised a luxury tax at some point to penalize teams that went over a certain threshold, and they gave that, but it doesn't in any way come close to compensating it or evening it out. But it's an attempt to say, okay, basically, we're going to build a system where you're going to earn your money on your own merit, but we're going to also honor the fact that everybody's an equal partner in the league. So there's going to be some money that's going to be shifted. The NFL has the perfect scenario.
Yeah.
The NFL, we can bring up just about anything involving money, marketing, whatever with the NFL, and they pretty much have not made a mistake in the 60 plus years that they've taken over American sports. And this is one that they kind of lucked into, because football's one time a week and it's not baseball where you're playing in local markets, and therefore the local market dictates how much money you make. In the NFL, you play once a week. All the games are on national television, and the networks decide who gets to see what and so forth, but it's all split. And so you can be in Green Bay, Wisconsin, in a town of 50,000 people, and you can compete with the New York Giants because you're splitting the national TV contract. And therefore, it's all fair across the board. And there's slight variances in merchandise sales and ticket sales, but it's basically everybody's making the same amount of money. And that's why you see whoever, Cincinnati can go to the Super Bowl, anybody can go to the Super Bowl, because the NFL evenly distributes money.
Yep. And that's the biggest thing is I think with the NCAA right now, they're in such a weird situation with not only the fact that there's so much scrutiny over every move they make in terms of NIL and stuff like that, but at the same time, they're also in this battle against conferences as well. So the NCAA has to really measure their approach based on, trying to mitigate backlash and damage towards them. So I think in some way they're going to find a way to figure that out. And revenue distribution, I think, was what Matt Rhule was talking about. Revenue sharing is what Matt Rhule was talking about before, that Trev Alberts was working on. This is going to be one of those things where he mentioned your athletic departments have to be ahead of the game when it comes to this stuff for you to survive. And I think that's the biggest thing, is those schools have to push for the equality there, and the equality of being able to compete even with this, in place. And I think, to your point, a lot of the money, most of the money comes from college football. That's not, that's for us that want to realize that, admit that. I think some of these educators are probably going to not take that into account and talk about the allocation of funds between where it goes in terms of the school, which department, and stuff like that. So, but for the most part, if they break down the numbers, they'd see that. I just think I think it's going to be one of those things that comes from it. But I do think that the NCAA, hopefully, with the pressure around them right now, is going to take a more measured approach than they usually do. Um, and for somebody talking about Deion bringing Sap in to coach the offensive line, that's yet another example of Deion being about names and not about substance. So I digress. But yeah, yeah, that's it's opened up a big revolving door of more questions. Just like we get some answered, and then here we go back around the ringer here with the transfer, acceptability of immediate transfers and the NIL stuff coming at this dropping at the same time. They probably did that to make sure you're distracted from one of them.
Just to add briefly to your Warren Sapp comment, this is no knock on Warren Sapp, who's an all-time great player and a Hall of Famer. And this is not a knock against his coaching ability because I don't know what his coaching ability is, but it's more likely that he's not going to work as hard, that he's not going to study as much film because of who he is. And he's just not been the guy that was a high school football coach that got a GA job at a group of five school that's put in 15 years, and now he's finally arrived at a place like Nebraska or Colorado where he can be an assistant coach and make good money, and he's been a grinder for 15 years. Now, I'm not saying maybe he will do that, but it's far less likely.
Yes. And it just, yeah. And it just, he could have brought in a guy with experience, could have brought in a guy with accolades with a lesser name, but is what it is. Is what it is.
The only other part that I need to hit on with what we're talking about with the NCAA is the basic point that you brought up at the forefront of all this is the NIL portion of it with the school. So the school's able to uh, organize the NIL, work with the athlete and the NIL, and so forth and so on. And that is the big differentiator, even if the Nebraskas and Ohio States and Penn States, et cetera, are sharing the money evenly with the Indianas and Illinois, that there is still going to be an inordinate amount of support from the boosters and the NIL collectives that those type of schools can receive versus
Others.
the lesser schools.
Yeah. And that's yeah, it's just to do whatever they can that's in their control to level the playing field, essentially. But some of those things are just always out of their control. And if donors want to donate money, you can't regulate that.
No,
So,
and we shouldn't.
yep.
You should keep track of it and understand what's going on, and there should be some type of reporting process. But uh, so many college football fans, and maybe you've been hit with the same thing, have been the same people, it seems, that were saying these athletes are getting ripped off.
Yep. Oh yeah.
It's a billion-dollar industry, and they make nothing. They just get a scholarship. Are now jealous and upset because athletes are making money.
Yep. It's crazy because those people were like, "Oh, scholarship's enough." Do you know how hard it is to be a collegiate student athlete? Always be on the road, traveling, trying to stay up with your schoolwork, maintaining a certain GPA, practices. Like it's difficult. Like
It's a full-time job, plus they're going to school.
most people couldn't handle it, and everybody who's saying scholarships enough have not even probably stepped foot on a field to know what it's like to even go through two-a-days in summer. So,
Absolutely. I am somewhere in the middle on that, in that I am one that values the scholarship and says that that is part of a very valuable payment to the
yes,
player,
exactly, but not
but
all.
that's not everything. And if it's a billion-dollar industry and the players are getting nothing but a
Give what they earn.
scholarship,
They
that's
have a
not
right.
right.
They have a right just like anybody else. We're in a society of capitalism. They should be able to put in work and make money off of the work they put in and off of the talent that they have. That is their value, you know.
And I also believe that it should continue to be a part of the collegiate experience for the gymnastics person or whomever that is extremely talented and so forth, but their sport does not generate money. It gets subsidized, it gets funded, but do they earn money? No, they get a scholarship because their sport does not generate money.
Right. And I think like Fong Wei, to your argument and some of the conversation going on here, is it a little bit out of control with the money flying around? Yeah. It's getting a little like the more and more money's being thrown around, the numbers get bigger and bigger. So, but that's two different arguments. One, we're saying the players should get compensated. We're not saying that all the compensation is exactly what it should be, or there shouldn't be little changes made. But the fact of the matter is they deserve to be paid, quite simply.
Yeah, they are contributing to again, hundreds of millions, billion-dollar industry per year. And so there should be some compensation. And again, trying to put a limit on, I understand putting a limit on, just like the NFL. The NFL has a salary cap that's tied directly to how much the league's worth and what the revenue is. And if the
Yep.
revenue would ever go down, it's within the
Inversely. Yep.
CBA that the player's salary cap would go down, but it keeps going up. Therefore, it's the cap's adjusted. They run a business and they know how to run the business, so they know that I'm just throwing out a number. 72% of their revenue needs to go to player salary, and when they make an extra $80 million more than they made last football season, the salary cap goes up a 72% of that,
Correct.
and they run a business. But yes, you can't. The only issue I have with the NIL. So if Joe Blow's Chevrolet dealer in Lincoln wants to give Dylan Raiola $1 million, I have no issue with that. That's between those two parties. I have an issue with that type of money going to a player, and then because it's not tied to his play, that he can take off with that money and not play for that school.
Yes. Yeah. And that's where the questions come in, is just how is it going to be done? Is it a year by year basis? Are they able to do, it's probably going to have to be year after year. And it's going to be one of those things where since there probably is going to be a written contract that, any moving away from the school is a violation of that. And, the school's out of it or something like that. But that remains to be seen. Like, is that kind of what you're alluding to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, these NIL, unless it's Nike, let's say they're an example where they just know that Dylan Raiola is a phenom.
Yes.
And wherever he plays, we just want to be attached to Dylan Raiola.
Right.
Just his brand. Therefore, that's what it is. But the Chevrolet dealer in Lincoln is attaching itself to Dylan Raiola
Yes.
because of him playing for Nebraska. Therefore,
right.
that
Yeah.
should be honored.
Exactly. No. Yeah, that makes sense. No, I agree with that wholeheartedly. Yeah, I just, man, as soon as this, like I said, something gets figured out, something changes, and it opens up a whole different myriad of questions and upcoming changes. And it's just like, at least football's coming up. So now we can, here pretty soon, we can just focus on football. I mean, football's here, but when it's going to be here regularly, we can focus on that. I'll be so happy. But we got to talk about this stuff while it's here, because it's important and it's the future of the sport.
People get caught up in how difficult they think the job is and how much it's worth because of how difficult it is. And I totally get that. I understand that if a guy's outside digging a ditch and working his tail off and breaking his back, then it'd be nice if he could make quite a bit of money to do that, because that's really hard work. But unfortunately, just about any guy that's 25 years old can sling a shovel and dig a ditch. Therefore, it's not worth that much.
Yep.
People were making comments, and I'm sure you saw it on social media, about Caitlin Clark's WNBA contract.
Yeah.
Being roughly between $75,000 and $90,000 salary per year, and saying, she's underpaid.
Yep.
Well, first of all, she's going to make a ton of money in endorsements.
Oh
So
yeah.
that's not the money she's making. But let's just stick to the salary. Actually, these WNBA players, as I see it, are overpaid, not because they're not good basketball players and shouldn't be paid and they're not working hard. People get that totally wrong. But the WNBA is in the red. It's
Yes.
not in the black. It's running a deficit and it's propped up by the NBA.
By a
Therefore, it's
lot.
not worth anything. Therefore, it's a charity of the NBA at this point. Now, Caitlin Clark and the popularity of women's college basketball may change that.
Yes. And it's Matt, I'm sorry, Adam Silver came out 2018, said the WNBA is losing $10 million per year. So to your point about it being propped up by the NBA, yes. And also, all of these sports had to build. It's not like all of a sudden they had this salary cap and it just stuck there. They raised it up to $300 million contracts and it just stayed there. They built that. Even the NFL still building up, players getting more and more. WNBA just wants to be shot to the top, immediately when it's just not, they're going to go under. If you pay them NBA contracts, they won't last past the first game of the season.
There is a great short with who's the guy that used to be on ESPN, Will Kane. I don't
Oh
know
yeah.
if you know who I'm
I
talking
like
about.
him. Yeah, I like Will Kane. He's
Will,
fiery, but
um, there was a I hope this doesn't offend anyone, but we're just talking and believe me, if the inverse was true, I'd be saying the same exact thing.
yep.
But there was upheaval over this was the last cycle of World Cup soccer
Yep.
that the men were being paid, I don't know what the amount, but let's say it was twice as much as the women. And there was all this, okay, this is not fair. The men and the women should be paid the same. And this isn't fair. And his point was, you're right, it's not fair. The men are only paid twice as much as the women. And then he rolled off the revenue generated by the men's World Cup versus the women's World Cup. And it's like 10 to 1 or
Yep.
20 to 1. He said, you're right. It's not fair. It should be
More for the men.
more than that.
Yep. And it's like people want to base the money off of the performance of the specific team or it's no different than, like, let's say, you want to they want to pay them on skills. They want to pay them on everything else but revenue. And it's always got to come down to revenue. Nebraska's not paying their players based on success of the program. They're paying their players based on revenue. And they've earned that revenue just like the men's sport has earned that revenue. They've grown it, and they've put the work into doing it. And so it's a handout versus building. And they should take this right now as a win and say, we've built the game year over year, the most we've ever probably built it. And so that's what they should be happy about, that, not complaining about how they're not the NBA,
Justin, maybe tomorrow we could change this YouTube channel to a I don't know, where
WNBA.
we do like stupid pranks or something. And if we did that well enough, we'd probably within a year have like 3 million subs and
Oh
we'd
yeah.
be getting like 10 million views per video and we'd be making a ton of money. Now, is that valuable? Is there value in that? Well, it depends how you based on the supply and demand. Yes, there is. If people want to see it, it makes money, but is it valuable? No. But in our society, based on supply and demand, yes, it is.
Exactly. Yeah, it'd be a lot easier. Like, most of my tweets that pop off are me talking about boxing or influencer boxing or something like that. Like, I could go on YouTube and yell about that and make money, but that's not of value to me. And before we get out of here, TMZ, you need to relax, buddy. I was in the military. Just calm down, dude. It was a example of something that is hard work, but not quite as difficult as what they go through the collegiate level. So yeah, calm down there, big guy. I'll leave that at that. But and to Scott's question that I put up on the screen earlier, drop that in the comments of the live after it posts, and I'll get to that.
Good stuff.
Oh, it's a fun conversation though.
Yeah. It is, and there's a lot. Whoever grabs control of this sport, and we don't know exactly who that's going to be, but I believe the SEC and the Big Ten are going to be involved uh, to some large degree.
Yeah.
That they're going to have to sift through all of this and figure out the best way to do it.
On top of all the movement and everything else that's already going on or potentially about to come down the hatch with other teams. So
Yes.
they got their hands full. Everybody does right now.
And the Big Ten has that much power, even though, Justin, half of those teams could lose to Colorado State.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Fongway, sorry, bro. We love you, though. Just remember that.
All right. Good stuff.
Oh.
Huskers Live right here at the Voice of College Football. We do this each and every Tuesday, typically 7 Eastern, 6 Central. You can catch Justin here. You can also catch him on the Big Ten Show. It's right here on YouTube. What's going on over there?
Yeah, so actually our latest episode had Mr. Mark Rogers on it, and was our first video. It was our 28th video on the channel and our first video over 11,000 views. So yeah, our first video over 10,000 views, and it's right now it's at 11,500, something like that. We're about 780 subscribers. You know, we're 3 months into the channel, about 780 subscribers. So we're growing, we're building. So and coming soon on this channel, I will be doing a collab going over spring preview with another Nebraska creator. And then also I will be doing a program overview of Nebraska in the next week or so on the Big Ten Show channel. So, and
here's
if
what you do, folks. We
Okay.
are dropping the link to the Big Ten Show channel right now. As soon as I can get in here, the link's going to be right in the chat. We'll make it easy on you.
Yeah, appreciate that. And then of course it would be the video with Mark that pops off the most, though. Would be.
That was probably a coincidence.
Oh yeah, it was a good conversation though. But yeah, Nebraska program overview coming soon, and then me and another creator are doing a series of channels about the spring game on this one and his channel. So I'll be announcing that soon.
Love it. Great stuff here by Justin, and we hope he can make it back here next Tuesday and bring a friend or two with you.
Yep.
And all right, very good, Justin. Thanks so much for gutting it out. We hope that voice is just that much or maybe that much better tomorrow.
Appreciate it.
And stay after it, and don't push yourself too much.
Absolutely. Got it. I just had to get one out for the people. So
awesome. All right, everyone. We appreciate you being here, and we will see you next time.
Later.